Greetings and welcome to another Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team video, where today I'm going over the problems with Bheta-Decima. But before we get into things, please remember to like and subscribe as well as comment. Let me know what you thought of today's video. Do you agree or disagree? And remember, I've got a Discord you can check out for free in the episode description below, an affiliate link at Element Games, and a Patreon if you want to give me some more support. But let's get on with the video. So yeah, for today, I'm covering the problems we have with the Bheta-Decima kill zone, because if you've been watching my videos recently, you'll know I'm no longer a fan of Bheta-Decima, to the point where I was running an event using Bheta-Decima and Into the Dark, and now I've switched to Into the Dark and Open, because I refuse to run Bheta-Decima at my events, as so do a lot of TOs around the world. So today I'll be covering what are the problems with Bheta-Decima, why it shouldn't be run at tournaments at the moment, and then what could be done to make it better. So notably, Bheta-Decima is the kill zone for Season 3. Season 1 was a mix of open maps. Season 2 was Into the Dark, close confined environments. And then for Season 3, it's Bheta-Decima. This was launched with Kill Team Salvation, and it's already had a big change already. So one of the big changes was you can't properly draw visibility over it now. It blocks, it trumps obscuring. So if you have ignore obscuring, it doesn't work anymore. And you have some refinements with TAC ops. And then they also introduced a dedicated crit ops map for it, as well as plastic objectives. But there's still lots of problems with this kill zone. And today I'll be covering why lots of TOs around the world don't use it. So basically, most American events aren't using it. Most of Europe isn't using it. Most of the UK isn't using it. So why aren't these people and TOs using Bheta-Decima for their events? So first off, when it comes to Bheta-Decima, is movement. If you don't have movement tricks, it actually is quite prohibitive to get around the kill zone, because everything is a minimum of 2 white to climb up until you get onto the gantries. You actually are fairly limited in where you can move. So if you especially don't have climbing gear, you can spend most of your turning point getting onto a gantry instead of actually moving up to the kill zone. And this becomes a problem more on maps where most of the objectives are towards the center of the board or on platforms. So you just kind of struggle there, because a lot of kill teams don't have movement tricks, and it's really disheartening to spend your turn 1 moving up to get onto gantries where your opponent, if they have movement tricks, can just move on to the objectives and immediately get onto objectives. So they're already a turn ahead of you, which is huge. And that limits so many kill teams, which I'll get onto in a bit. And then the other problem we have is the lack of playable space. So if you look at Bheta-Decima maps, you have this large area of hazardous water. So either on some maps, because it's a double-sided board, either it's a huge rectangle or it's 2 rectangles with a bit of land in the middle, depending on which side of the board your map is using. And the big problem is, because it blocks off so much of the kill zone, you actually have less space to play on, to the point where Bheta-Decima now feels like Into the Dark but with invisible walls, and it becomes really unfun to play because it's very easy to see where you're going to go, especially when objectives are where you need to go on gantries. And with the lack of playable space, it actually makes it really hard for larger teams to play around, because there's less place to move. But in general, you're either moving down the flanks or moving up onto the gantries, or trying to move down the middle of the board where there is that land. And it just becomes really restrictive, because all of a sudden blast attacks and effects get even better, because especially if you're trying to move down the middle, there's only like an effective 3-inch gap of land for you to move up until you get into the middle circle of land. And it just becomes really punishing to play, especially once you get shot up from above. And just having that limited playable space, just really boring if you find it really tough to play around. Then the other big issue is for Bheta-Decima at the moment. So currently, at the time of this video, we have about 30 factions excluding Compendium. And the issue is 10 of those factions can play Bheta-Decima well, and the other 20 can't. And you have this weird scenario where if you're playing against another kill team that doesn't have any movement tricks on Bheta-Decima, it's fine, because you're both going to effectively spend turning point 1 getting into position, and then turning point 2 you're going to be scoring the objectives, which is fine, right? But the moment you play into a team that either has climbing gear, forward deploys, or fly, or any way to get up onto those gantries quickly, you suddenly just lose, because they can easily go 3 objectives or even 4 turning point 1 while you only get 1. And that's even with like a recon dash to get into position. And all of a sudden, them getting into position, going free primary to your 1 immediately, and then setting up their tac ops for turning point 2 onwards while you're still trying to stage your game. It's really, really bad, to the point where it becomes really limiting to play. Now, there is this dichotomy where, you know, Into the Dark does, and to an extent did, favor close combat teams, and Beta-Decima definitely favors shooting teams, but the extreme swing is way more, and it's not just shooting teams, it's anyone with climbing gear and all those forward deploys, because the problem you have is you just lose. On paper, you just lose because all of a sudden you're down 2 to 3 points in the primary turning point 1, and as long as your opponent just keeps scoring 3, they're always going to be 2 points ahead, and that can just win them the game automatically, because they'll already be in position to, especially if they have recon, to score secure vantage, recover item, all those kind of tac ops, while you're just struggling to get into position. And it's such a huge swing, which is why when I'm speaking to other competitive players, they're like, yeah, literally, if I'm playing in a Beta-Decima only event, or I know the event I'm playing at is using Beta-Decima, I am going to use one of those 10 teams that actually basically has a chance on Beta-Decima compared to the teams that aren't, because I know the moment I play into them and I'm not using one of those 10 teams, I'll lose. So it's not even just like against melee teams, it's against most of the meta, to the point where we didn't even have that in Into the Dark. While Into the Dark, close range teams and melee teams are better, it's not to the point where you go, oh, I've lost the game. And that's at the start of deployment, which is really bad, especially if you want to play Beta-Decima in a competitive environment. Because the common misconception is people think it just hurts melee teams. No, it hurts 20 out of our 30 teams at the moment, which is huge, crazy. Then the other issue is bad maps. So the crit up maps are a lot better, right? They're really far more playable than the standard maps we got in Salvation. But the biggest issue is effectively only 3 out of those 6 maps are playable. And you could argue map 4 is good, but the problem with map 4, because all the objectives are effectively on gantries, it becomes really hard to play if you don't have any movement tricks, which limits you to maps 1, 2, and 3. Now, there's a common agreement with TOs that are running Beta-Decima not to use maps 5 and 6, because the Ferrotonic Furnace never should have had 2 objectives on it. It should have been limited to 1. But those maps are so bad because it's a mixture of 2 objectives being on the Ferrotonic Furnace, as well as most of the objectives being in the center of the board, especially map 6, that those are extreme auto losers to anyone with 4 deploys, because all of a sudden, turning point 1, they're on 4 objectives and you're on 0 and you just lose. So there's no real safe way to move up. And even if you look at all of the crit up maps for Beta-Decima, none of them use diagonal deployments, which, to be fair, Into the Dark doesn't either. But it was just weird how we have such a limited pool of Beta-Decima maps from Games Workshop, because they made 10 for Into the Dark, but only 6 for Beta-Decima, and only really 3 are usable. And even then, the best map is probably map 1. That's probably the fairest, and map 2 and 3 are just okay. Map 4, as I said, as I've gone on, and I believe map 4 isn't a good map either, but map 5 and 6 are just bad. And the problem is, when you can only use 3 out of 6 maps in a competitive environment to try and, you know, make it a fair playing space for most kill teams, it just becomes really limiting, because, you know, you can argue Octarius or Chalnath are limiting kill zones, but they have effectively 9 different layouts you can use. So only having 3 good maps is a problem, even with my map pack, because even though my map pack provides heavy cover as a staging point, it doesn't help on those bad layouts. And I know some people are making map packs to try and make that more playable, but then the issue I've seen is they've either put all the objectives on the ground floor, nothing on the gantries, which then flips things the other way in a problematic way, or there are more objectives on the gantries, there's no real consensus. So it's kind of just accentuating the bad problems we have with Beta-Decima mechanically as a whole. And then the last thing is just the wonky objectives. So the Games Workshop objectives are actually a big problem. They're the ones that come in the Beta-Decima box. So the issue is only about 2 of them are vantage points. And the problem with them being vantage points is if they're on a vantage point that you can score vantage from, you can score vantage from the objective and then from the gantry itself, because they're both separate vantage points. And then the other issue is if you're standing on these vantages on the ground floor, because they're not on the kill zone floor, they completely get past the hazardous area rule, which doesn't make sense. And the other issue is because they're completely round and light, the issue is they're really hard to get cover from. Because they're round, they cause awkward issues with that, and they do block movement, especially when they're on the end of gantries, because you can't move around them in free space, right? So you'd have to pay to traverse. So when they're on the edge of gantries where objectives are, they actually block people from dash jumping on and stuff. So they're really problematic, and the issue is they haven't been addressed. So we all thought they were going to be addressed. You can house rule them, but no one's agreeing on how to correctly house rule them, because these objectives are so weird. For example, when I was using Bheta-Decima using my map pack doesn't use these objectives, and I wouldn't use them at my events. But then it's like there's no real consensus. It's just they haven't been fixed, and it felt like they were kind of like quickly worked in to be playable to an extent because the core box lacks any terrain, right? So it's just weird. It's a weird scenario that hopefully could be fixed in the future. And then the last problem is lack of availability. So this terrain set sold out. The funny thing is I had a lot of people telling me like this terrain wasn't going to sell, and then when it did sell out, they were like, oh well, clearly they underproduced. So but the big issue, it's really hard to get this kill zone, and even though it's the cheapest kill zone to buy, it's out of stock. But also it feels more to buy, because if you compared to Into the Dark was pushed heavily by Games Workshop. You got a cheap way to buy it with 40k with boarding actions. So if you wanted to buy it for a club or store, you could get 2 sets of Into the Dark in boarding action for like, I think it was like £100 or something, which was really a good deal at the time. And then because terrain was included at the start of every Into the Dark box, people were just giving Into the Dark away. And also Games Workshop gave Into the Dark to a lot of stores and tournament organizers to run kill team tournaments. So the lack of availability and lack of cheap second-hand ways to get this terrain means a lot of places don't even have stock. I still have some people in my community who wanted to get Kill Team, the Bheta-Decima environment, but couldn't because it's out of stock. And then it came back in and then immediately sold out. So that's actually another issue with production, because it's just really hard to get, because Kill Team terrain, because it can be used in 40k, and this one is actually compatible with most of the 40k terrain, so it has use in Necromunda. Those issues actually make it really hard to get. So you have issues where stores can't even get enough copies to run at tournaments. And I think that's a fair issue to bring up as well, because I think it's often overlooked. So even people who usually, because a lot of places like in my area of the world, we get players donating terrain for events. So they'll bring their terrain to the event, then take it home. But a lot of our players weren't able to buy it. So there's just a big issue in sourcing it in general. So now I've covered all those issues with Bheta-Decima. How could it be fixed to make it playable for everyone? So my first fix would be making all gantries 1 white to climb. So it's only 2 inches off of your movement to get onto a gantry. So it does kind of basically eliminate everyone using climbing gear, because they always have to pay a minimum of 1 white to climb. So it's always 1 white to climb and drop from a gantry. And I think that would help so much, because it eliminates the advantage of having climbing gear, but it does help with people who still have access to forward deploys. But it means, for example, like even though we like to meme about it, Vet Guard literally basically can't use Into the Breach in Bheta-Decima because they can only move up the flanks. At least with this way, they could kind of dash up to a gantry. So it will give you just more playable space. So you're not spending the entirety of Turning Point 1 just climbing gantries. Because minusing 4 inches for your movement just to get into position is huge. So at least making it everything 1 white to climb would be fine. Like just give them an all special, like super scalable, something like that. I think that would help so much. Then the next rule would be fixing the hazardous areas line of sight ability so it completely blocks visibility. So the current issue is with the wording, which I don't think is intended, but it's how it works at the moment. So the wording for hazardous areas, it only blocks visibility when you're checking for line of sight. So visibility-based effects still work. So this is the big problem with marker lights. Marker lights will just still work, but also you've got like the freezing grasp from Corsairs. So anything based on visibility will still work on Bheta-Decima, because the current wording only blocks visibility when you check for line of sight for shooting, which is an issue, but the problem is Games Workshop has done this before where they just add in a new rule like in the middle of a paragraph and they don't really think about the ramifications it has. Because the biggest problem we had was like in Into the Dark. They were like, for forward deploys, oh, you just changed you just after the second sentence, which meant a lot of kill teams, instead of having to start and conceal or picking a certain operative, could now start and engage on Into the Dark and then move up, open a door, and then throw a grenade. So it's not like this is a new problem, this is an old problem, but it really needs fixing because it would make effectively Pathfinders less powerful, even though Pathfinders are a huge problem in Beta-Decima. Like in general, Pathfinders need to be nerfed so Beta-Decima doesn't get dominated by them, but fixing the visibility rules would help a lot. Then the next rule, I would add the swimming rules. So Nightmare introduced swimming and diving. So this allows you to jump off of gantries into the water and then like just move up into the water in general. So while you're in the water, you can't fight or shoot, but you count as being in cover. So all they would have to say is you can move into the hazardous area, but you can't fight or shoot, and you count as being in light cover. So if you have a conceal order, you still count as being concealed until someone gets on a gantry and they could shoot down at you. It does make stuff with super conceal more powerful because they can just freely move up the board, but they're just moving, right? They could charge out, but you can also add if someone starts their activation in water and then they can't then fight if they charge out. So they could charge but then just be stuck there. But it would also allow the dozer to finally punch people into the water, which everyone would love, because all of a sudden, let's say someone was going to Overwatch, you could knock smash them off a gantry, off an objective, into the water with an engage order, and now they can't shoot. So it would just add some more tactical space, but also give you more freedom, so you're not just go like, oh, I can either move up the flanks or the gantry, because you're still swimming in the water, so you can't shoot. You can swim on an engage order if you're brave, but it would just give more playable space and make the kill zone more interesting. Then another fix to Beta-Decima that would help is you cannot place barricades or tokens or other effects or items in the hazardous area. Because one thing, so the barricade thing is a bit niche. So barricades can't be partly, they have to be outside the hazardous area. Because what you can do, if you're trying to make your flank, you're moving up safe, you can put half of your barricade on the kill zone floor and half in the water, which only like shouldn't really happen. But then the other thing is, if I'm playing into someone who's locked into infiltration, I can just put my barricades in the water if I don't need them, and then they can never score siege defenses, which just feels weird. But then the bigger thing about stopping tokens and effects being placed in the hazardous area, it means like you can't place nanomine in the water in front of someone's kill zone. You can't place like the tox bomb, the torment grenade in the water hitting lots of people, and you can't place like just weird effects that shouldn't, because technically it's like a hazardous moving like watery area, so those things shouldn't really be held in place, and it just makes those effects less toxic to play against while on Beta-Decima, because it's like really sucks when someone just pops a nanomine outside of your drop zone in the water, pinning everyone trying to move up and around, or someone throwing a torment grenade in the water which hits all of your guys behind terrain or gantries. So I think that would just tidy up the game space as a whole to make it more interesting. And then the last thing they'd need to do is just fix the objectives. So you could just make them, I don't know, insignificant, maybe provide cover, remove the vantage rule on them, because as I said, you only get 2 with vantage points out of the 6 or 8 objectives. So if they were all vantage points, it wouldn't be a problem, but just remove the vantage point traits from them and just tidy up the objectives so they don't clash with the kill zone so much. And then it will just be a lot less of a headache when people, like, even when you're playing an event and you're like, oh, how does the objective work? And I'm like, oh, you know, it really shouldn't. But it's like, so the weird thing is, technically Harlequins have to spend 1 white to get off and on those objectives because they're vantage points. It's just so weird, right? Just give them like the insignificance trait, and but then add them like a special rule, like they still provide cover. So you can move through them for free, but they provide light cover, just to like help people only using the Beta-Decima objectives for terrain. Then that would be fine. But yeah, if they used all those changes, it would make Beta-Decima a more interesting kill zone, less punishing to most of the kill teams in the game, and make it more interesting to play on and more fun. Because can you imagine like just a Space Marine swimming up, just going like, I'm going to swim 9 inches, just swimming 9 inches, or I'm walking at the bottom of the water, right? That would be so cool. Like even gene stealers swimming up the ocean, that would be cool. Just, it would make the kill zone more fun. Because the biggest problem I used to be a big proponent for Beta-Decima until I started playing on it more with kill teams that don't benefit or have any tricks around it. And it's incredibly depressing. Because like the biggest issue is the moment you play against someone who does have these tricks like climbing gear, you know, forward deploys, you just kind of lose. And it's not because like you're getting outplayed. It's just because they can start further up the board or get onto the board easily compared to you. So it's not even just like, as I said, but it doesn't just hurt melee teams. It hurts most of the kill teams in the game at the moment, which is why I don't use it for my events. Most of the American TOs don't use it for their events. Most of the European TOs don't use it for their events. And, you know, we've got this big divide in the UK where like, I'm not going to run it for my events. A lot of UK events aren't running it, but then you've got some are. Because the biggest problem is like Beta-Decima is the only kill zone at the moment where you can literally turn up and play against someone. But the moment you're playing a kill team that doesn't have any movement tricks and they have any movement tricks, you just lose because they can get onto 3 objectives, turning point 1, while you basically just get onto 1. And it sucks because that's not really a competitive game. As I said, I found Beta-Decima quite disappointing when they removed jump tests. I was always a fan of just making on a 1 you take 2 mortal wounds, or like making the jump thing only apply if you're injured. Something like that would have been more interesting. But at least with these fixes, it would make the Beta-Decima kill zone more playable, more fun, just more interactive. Because as I said, when I've been speaking to other players and TOs, the biggest issue they have, Beta-Decima is basically like Into the Dark, but with invisible walls. At least when you played Into the Dark, you still had huge areas of the kill team kill zone you could still use. And, you know, the worst thing was if you didn't have a comms, because it was only 1 action point to open a door. Like if it's just 1 action point to get up onto a gantry, it wouldn't be so bad, like a scramble. But at the moment, imagine if you had to pay 2 whites, like 1 white. Oh no, yeah, if you had to pay like your movement to open doors and Into the Dark, all of a sudden you just couldn't move anywhere. And I think that's just the biggest issue. You're really limited in how you can move and play. And when kill team's such a positional heavy game, you just kind of, it takes all the fun out of the game where you just go like, as I said, I'm trying to get into position turning point 1. You're on the objectives turning point 1. There's like statistically no way I can now actually win this game. And it sucks. But hopefully these changes, if they ever did get implemented, like I don't think they would, but if all those changes, it would just be so great. And finally we could have Beta-Decima used more universally across the kill team world. Because if it had those changes, I'd definitely use it. I'd love to see when I'm running events, people like swimming across the ocean, surviving, getting shot, or like, you know, half-kin players just punching people into the ocean. You just like the dozer, instead of the slapping meme, he's just walking around punching people into the ocean. Like it'd be great. It'd be so much fun. And I think the kill zone is almost there. It's a kill zone that had needed way more refinement. Because if you compared it to Into the Dark, for the first 2 or 3 months, Into the Dark was a bit of a mess. But the moment Games Workshop dropped Crit Ops with that clarification and update, it's been fine. And like it's even more fun now. We've got Dakota and his asymmetrical map pack for Into the Dark, which you can find from Luster's Workshop and Squad Games. But that's pretty much it from me today. Hopefully this ramble was enjoyable for you, so please remember to like and subscribe as well as comment. Let me know what you think. Do you agree, disagree? Are you using Beta-Decima? Are you not? What do you think of my changes? What would you add? Let me know. I'd be really interested to hear. And remember, I've got a Discord you can check out for free in the episode description below, an affiliate link at Element Games, and a Patreon if you want to give me some more support. And I'll quickly shout out my patrons. So for my Adepts of the Crit, I have Willax, Tom, Super Cow, Sam, Nick, Kenzie, John Thomas, Graham, Freeman, David, Dave Meets World, Dad of Golden's Ben, and then for my Veterans of the Crit, I have Samja. So thank you so much for all your support. It really means a lot to me and helps support the channel. I've been wanting to make this video for a while. Hopefully it comes across well, because it's like Beta-Decima, as I said, I used to love it. And then I started playing kill teams who can't play it. And I was like, yeah, I was wrong. This kill zone sucks. So hopefully it gets the changes it needs, because I don't like banning kill zones for my events, but I want everyone to have a fair time. So hopefully Beta-Decima gets more of a change so it sees more adoption, because it just needs to be more playable. But should be an exciting month for May, because I've got my tournament I'm running this week in Darksphere, but it's also, I think, the 3rd year I've actually been doing YouTube. So I need to do something special for that. I think it is. because I've been doing content creation now for, I think, six years, something like that. So gotta celebrate some way. But that's pretty much it. Remember, no matter what happens when you're playing on the high seas of Beta-Decima, there's always a chance to win as long as you can roll a crit with climbing gear.